Afternoon, everyone, or late morning. My name is Caitlin Peter. I am your Vice President of Government Affairs here at the DC Association of Realtors. Thank you for logging on. We know many of our Public Policy Committee members have already been on doing some heavy lifting on our legislative front. We now have a really informative and resourceful resource for you, and that is a speaker from our DC Public Schools from the Office of the Deputy Chancellor. You will have the pleasure today of hearing from Claudia Luján, a senior representative from the Office of the Deputy Chancellor. She will be discussing all things DCPS. We know that DCPS is absolutely on the forefront of not only your minds, your clients' minds, your colleagues' minds, and we're really happy to offer you this resource. Claudia has spoken to our association before. You could YouTube her and see her presentation, which she's done on school boundary issues. She's probably going to be annoyed with me for saying that it's on YouTube, but she did an awesome job then. We're happy she was willing to come back now. And we're going to leave time for question and answers. This is going to be very casual and informal in the sense that, please feel free please allow Claudia to get through her presentation. And then after, we're going to have plenty of room for questions. You can type them in the chat. Evan Bukadakis, who's our Associate Government Affairs Director, will be monitoring it as well. And then we can have a dialogue. And if there's anything that perhaps Claudia might not be able to answer for you, we're going to maintain a really good relationship with her office and be able to get back to you and to provide those tools and resources on our website as well. So I will leave it there. Claudia, please introduce yourself and let's move on and let's enroll with the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I appreciate the opportunity. As Caitlin mentioned, Claudia Luján, I've been a DC I'm worried I'm frozen. Oh, there. Did I freeze for a moment? I usually can tell, so I usually stop and then I'm like anxiously waiting for it to come back. So I have been in DC government since 2007. I have been as part of the Deputy Mayor for Education's office and DCPS for many years. And I have worked primarily in planning and enrollment field. And so, as Caitlin mentioned, in 2014, we underwent a comprehensive boundary redraw process, which I led out of the Deputy Mayor's office. And now I oversee planning and enrollment for DCPS. So I'm also born and raised in DC, went to public schools for elementary school. So have been in the area all of my life and have been part of the DCPS community for a really very long time. My background is not in teaching and learning, so I don't come from the school classroom. I don't teach. My background is actually social work and program management and program design. So, but the social work skills have helped me throughout the years as I've had the opportunity to lead some pretty large change processes for schools and families and communities. I am very much enjoy engaging school communities and a lot of the planning work that DCPS does over the last several years. And so I come to you with that perspective. That said, having been at DCPS and in DC government for a long time, I also have and would love to talk a little bit today also about sort of the broader DCPS issues. So happy to take questions beyond sort of my scope. And as Caitlin mentioned, any questions that I don't answer, always happy to take back and make sure I get the right information back to you all. So as you guys know, this has been a pretty intense last year. It's been almost a year that was spent almost all virtual, not quite yet. DCPS was able to reopen in the middle of the year to offer in-person seats. But it was a pretty big year for obviously the country, not just DC. And it's been quite a tough year for our communities, for our families, for schools, but something that we have also learned a lot, grown a lot, and we are very much positioning ourselves to reopen strong in the fall. As folks may be aware, we are going to be reopening full in-person for everybody who is watching it in person every day. So that's very exciting. We are hard at work to make sure that we are ready for that. And I'm confident we are and will be. We have learned, this past year through virtual learning, we've learned, one, how resilient our communities are in really adapting to the virtual environment, how resilient our teachers and staff are, and really have learned to quickly pivot and understand the kinds of supports that not only our students and families need, but that also our staff and schools need. So we have learned a lot this past year and are excited to kind of put those things into place and really start strong in the fall. So as I mentioned, the mayor has announced that we will be opening full time. We are excited to open August 30th. For anybody who's ready to come back, we will have in person every day. And so we hope to have things go back to normal. That said, things will be a little bit different. We are going to be, safety and health is top priority. So we are taking the precautions necessary. We will be able to ensure that and make sure that the routine at the school is taking into consideration social distancing guidelines that will still be in place for schools. We are also doing all of the necessary facility upgrades that have been happening over the past year and then will continue to happen through the summer to get ready for the fall and to get ready for more students back in our schools. As folks know, all of our schools did open their doors several months ago. It's not at full capacity, and there are a lot of, haven't been able to open all of our classrooms back for every single day, but that will be happening in the fall. So we're excited about that. And as we enter, right now we're really focused on what we are wanting to make sure to outreach and sort of a confidence building campaign with our families to make sure that they are aware that it is going to be safe to come back, and it is safe to come back to schools, and it'll be safe for everybody to come back, all together in the fall. And so we've been taking a lot of precautions and also really wanting to share all of that with families so families are aware of the things that and we saw an incredible amount of, so we're excited to be able to continue to support schools, to support efforts to make sure that we are supporting schools' budgets so folks that aren't taking a big hit this year. As folks may be aware, we did take an enrollment hit as a district. Many districts across the country took an enrollment hit this year due to COVID. And so really wanted to make sure that our schools are not making the sacrifices or taking that hit moving forward. So really have built a lot into our budget to support schools. We also have a lot of investment in technology to ensure that we are refreshing, ensuring that all staff and students have refreshed technology, and then also lots of investments in supports and targeted supports. We know that, again, this year has been challenging, and so outside of being able to offer summer school, which will start in a few weeks, we are also making sure that we are providing targeted supports for those students that have fallen most behind. So really focusing that in terms of our investments going into next year as well. We also have, outside of the teacher, student, and educator technology, we are significantly investing in teacher growth, recruitment, and retention. And so that's another area of investment, as well as some innovative new things like outdoor learning and other creative initiatives that we are looking forward to bringing to schools next year. And so with that, I want to kind of open it up to questions. That's sort of like a high level area of the kind of things that we are focused on, but I'm sure that you all have specific questions related to the families that you work with or the communities that you're working in, or your own potential family or situation as you're thinking about, your family and going back to school and education. So with that, I think we can pause.
Let's shift the conversation. If you want to ask questions, unmute yourselves, and we can go from there. Please ask questions. You are not a shy group. I know this on good knowledge. Stacy, do you want to start us off with a question? Amy, I'm going to start calling on people. This is a DC Public Schools speaker series. I feel like I can do that.
As folks are eagerly waiting to raise their hands, I will talk about a couple things that we have been working on this year. We are going to be actually opening a new school next year that we are excited about. It's a new early learning center. It's called the Military Road Early Learning Center in Ward 4. And so amidst all of the craziness, we are excited to be able to offer our learning center for a little bit over 100, about 100 students in pre-K 3, pre-K 4. We'll just offer pre-K 3, pre-K 4. It's a citywide school, so it does not have a boundary, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with the schools that have boundaries. So it's open for anybody across the city. And so we're excited to be able to open the doors to that early learning center in the fall. It'll be our second early learning center. In COVID, we opened our first, which was Stevens Early Learning Center in, sort of right in the middle of the city. And so we're excited to be able to do that next year.
Good news. Good news. Amy?
Hi, this is Jennifer. I'll go ahead and start with a question because I am both a DC parent and a realtor. And thank you for being here, because I have to say, in terms of my clientele, one of the biggest reasons why people do start a home search is obviously schools. They have desire to be in a particular school district, or as I saw in many cases this year, some entirely changing locations around school decisions. But I've been in DC myself since the late 90s, where a lot of folks, when they would have children, they would leave DC and move to Virginia, Maryland. More families are now staying in the district, and for education, it has been absolutely fantastic. There have been so many wonderful additions and changes. But as these first children are now moving up, what is the next step in looking at middle and high school?
I think we're paused.
You stunned her.
That was a good question, Jennifer.
It's what I get all the time, though. A lot of middle schoolers and high schoolers are now starting to look at Montgomery County, and I want to see these families stay in DC. So sorry, we lost you for a moment.
Yeah, I lost you as soon as you said, so I want to know. And it was like, and I'm assuming, as I caught the last part, is investment in secondary schools as it relates to feeder patterns.
Exactly. So I know we've had a lot of improvements and things for the early childhood education, but what does the future look like for middle school and for high school?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I join you in the excitement as we see more families staying in DC and as we see more families choosing DCPS. We actually had our biggest uptick in enrollment in just the year before COVID in 1920, where we increased over 1,000 students. It's been the biggest increase in the last decade or so. We're really excited, and the majority of that increase was primarily driven by families choosing to go to their in-boundary school and staying in their feeder pattern. So we're really excited about that. But yes, it has been, historically, our enrollment numbers have showed that we will typically lose more kids at the secondary level. And it happens in a couple of different ways. One, the majority of the loss tends to be families that will move out of the district. But we also see a lot of, and not across the city, but in particular areas of the city, we also see a lot of competition and loss to some of the charter schools. As you all know, we have a high city with lots of public school choice. And so right now, just under 50% of families choose a charter school, and a little bit over 50% choose DCPS. Within DCPS, we also have a lot of choice. So we have about half of our population choose to go to school outside of their feeder pattern. So that is, that's a real thing. That said, we have seen the uptick in the increase of more families staying at middle school and more families staying for high school. We have done a lot of work in a couple different areas in terms of our secondary schools. One is we've had a lot of investment in sort of graduation excellence in terms of really ensuring that we have very clear articulated pathways and alignment across curriculum and courses across feeder patterns. We did, I think a couple years now with the chancellor, have started to do more aligning of internally in terms of the infrastructure and structures that we have to organize ourselves to really align more across feeder patterns so we can get more of that vertical articulation. When you see that, when families see that predictability in programming, that also helps engender sort of the confidence that like, okay, this is the path for my student, and I feel more confident in the secondary options. We still have a lot more ways to go, right? We still have a long way to go, but we are definitely having focus on a lot of the vertical articulation piece, ensuring that particularly sort of as the path to graduation, that we are setting up that path from a course perspective so that families and students can see that and are getting the supports along the way to ensure that strong finish at high school and that they're set up for success after high school. So that's still, and we are seeing some of that play out. We're seeing some of that play out in some of the enrollment upticks that we've seen, particularly in some of Ward 1 and Ward 4 secondary schools, where most of the students are now choosing to stay in the feeder pattern versus choose other paths. So we're excited about that trajectory. Again, more work to do on that, but definitely something that we know is a critical piece for families as they're making choices to stay in DCPS.
Evan, do you want to go ahead and field the questions in the chat?
Yeah, I'm trying to, let's see. Let's see.
Yeah, so my team does.
Oh.
Are we all paused?
Oh no, I think she had.
Oh yeah, sorry. My team has the link to Octo's site where the Arcgis files are for the boundaries. We've worked a lot to try and get the right boundary images that are PDF and legible. So happy to sort of, we have a couple different spots that we include those in, but we do have the sort of the raw files for folks that are a little bit more tech savvy that want to kind of dig into that, that Octo has on their site. Let's see.
Then we can, it was in reference to, yeah, Amy Fisher's question.
Amy's question, yeah. I'm pretty sure, I don't think it's, yes, I think to Lauren's comment, yes, I mean, I think it's to your point about sort of the word choice, whether you use choice or not. Either way, families are not feeling, confident in keeping their students in the feeder pattern. Again, we're seeing that shift over time. And so we definitely see the value and want to support our neighborhood schools. As folks know, that we have currently this year, we have 117 schools. The majority of our schools are what we call neighborhood or boundary schools. A neighborhood school, aka, is also a school that has a boundary. And then we also have a subset of citywide schools. Citywide schools can be just straight citywide or can also be citywide selective. So we have a subset of selective high schools and we have a few citywide schools, both at the elementary and secondary level.
Yeah. Next one is from Kwame Joseph.
Bad school ratings that shows online. So I'm not sure you'll like my answer to this one as much. I anticipate, but I'm imagining you're talking about like great schools or those kinds of things. Those, while I definitely think that those are a data point that DCPS should acknowledge and consider. I don't think that those are always the best, they're very solely data driven. One of the things that we tell families all the time is there's nothing like going to visit a school and actually seeing the school culture and environment when you walk into the building, meeting some of the teachers that sort of do it justice. And again, there's a lot that can be said and is important with school on paper, but it's not the full picture. And I think it's similar to like, we're not only what we say in our resume. So much of us is like meeting us in person, seeing what it's like, having a conversation tells much more of a comprehensive story. And that's the same sort of thing for schools. And so I always encourage folks to make contact with the school, talk to other parents, talk to school staff. Teachers are a great way to kind of get a sense. And many times when you just walk into your schools, I think about walking to my children's school, like you just kind of get a sense of that culture as you walk in. And I think that's a really important part of making a school decision. We also know that not every family has the ability to do that, right? To walk into every school and meet every teacher. And so we try and make sure that we are providing a comprehensive view of what a school offers. We do have school profiles on our website. We also work very closely with the My School DC, which is the online citywide lottery for families that need to access pre-K, and also for families that want to go to a school outside of their boundary, where we have school profiles that give a little bit more than just the main data points to try and get a little bit more sense of a school. So to that, definitely something that we are cognizant of and want to be aware of, but definitely don't encourage folks to put all the stock into some of those rating systems.
Claudia, I want to say I appreciate you bringing in this notion of community building. I think that schools are, if you are in a position where you can get involved in your school community and you can get to know other parents and teachers and be involved and help shape not only your child's future. This is an editorial from my part. I do appreciate the community approach to schools that the mayor and that your office is taking, and however we can work to incorporate that as well with our members and sharing information, we're happy to do that.
Great. And I also think too, schools, our teachers, our staff, DCPS has been doing a lot of work investing in schools over the last several years, obviously. And so there are schools that may have, a decade ago had a very different reputation than what it is now. And so I really think, taking that second look and sort of thinking broadly about that change, I think is also important. The ratio of students in public schools versus private schools. It's a really good question. So we work closely with the Deputy Mayor for Education's office and their data team. We don't have great data on private school. And so the Deputy Mayor's office does a sort of back of the envelope kind of rough cut version of what the private school capture rate is. I don't know it off the top of my head. I can send you the link sort of where they have Edscape, where they have a lot of the data. We don't have access to that data, so we really work closely with the Deputy Mayor's team who does. We see pockets, obviously, in different areas of the city that have higher private school participation than others. That said, we just anecdotally, I don't have the data behind this, but just anecdotally in talking, particularly after COVID, and talking to a lot of our school leaders and school teams, I'm very curious to see how that has shifted this past year, particularly, many of, some of our schools that said, we had families that typically would be with us, sort of opt for something different, and then vice versa. Families that typically wouldn't be going to private schools now all of a sudden, find themselves able to or willing to go to private schools, and then vice versa. There was a lot of shifting, right? So we also felt like families, and again, this is anecdotal, families that were in private school now were either, in certain areas, so there's families that were traveling abroad, that were sort of doing other things, or choosing to participate in public school because it was all virtual. So, why not do the virtual piece? And so there's been a lot of interesting shifting, and even homeschool has been something that we saw an uptick in the city with homeschool participation. So I'm very curious to see, as the Deputy Mayor sort of works on the data, to see how, if any of those shifts were extremely dramatic, and what those look like. So we don't have really great data. The data that we do have is from the Deputy Mayor's office, and it does look a little different in different areas of the city. And it's very rough because we don't have great private school data to work with. Well, what has been the funding for schools in Ward 7 and 8 where the resources have not been equitable? So that's a That's a great question. We have done a lot of, particularly with COVID, where we saw our numbers drop across the district, and in particular in different areas of the city. And so this year, as we go into the next budget cycle, really wanting to make sure that we are holding about 14 million of the federal funds were used to hold schools harmless. And sort of fulfill the original budget request, so that those that took a significant enrollment or other dip, we were able to provide those supports. There was another about 7 million or so, a little under, that was additional budget assistance. And then we will continue to evaluate as we get additional ESSER funds to be able to figure out where how best to support schools to ensure that they have access to equitable funds. And so, yeah, so in terms of, and obviously, particularly for schools in Ward 7 and 8, our funding system is, to make sure I'm not frozen. Okay, I'm back now. I'm back. We ensure that, particularly in some of the schools, like Ward 7 and 8 are schools that have students with high needs, that we are accounting for that. So the way that our funding model works is that we have a base funding per pupil based on grade. And then we have weighted funding that's added depending on if the student qualifies as at risk. Or has special education needs, or is an English language learner. Students that fit within those categories, schools then get additional funding for those students, sort of as a weighted funding to be able to better serve them. So definitely, you know, that has been a significant investment. When we think about our local dollars, a little bit over 12 million of them was used to stabilize about 37 schools to keep them within the 95% of last year's budget. Again, many of those schools are also in Ward 7 and 8. But again, as an effort, given we know the big hit that we took from an enrollment perspective, a lot of investment made by the mayor and the chancellor to try and keep hold those schools harmless and continue to support those schools so they don't take that a big hit. Thank you, Essie. And then I think those were all the questions in the chat.
There was one about the vaccination for teachers.
Oh, thank you. Great question. I'm not aware at this point that it is required, but I will definitely follow up and confirm that with you all. It's not, I don't believe it's required at this point, but that could change. But that's something that I'd probably definitely want to confirm with my colleagues.
Does anyone have any additional questions? We might let you off easy today. Short meetings aren't necessarily bad meetings, right? I think it means that.
No, not at all. I will say we did just finish, and then I see a hand up. We did just finish a planning process for 2 additional schools that we brought to the portfolio in Ward 3 that are slated to open in the future. So we just wrapped up a pretty big engagement process on that, and we will hopefully be announcing a decision in terms of how the schools will be used over the next few weeks. And so folks may have heard that the new Foxhole MacArthur, DCPS purchased the old GDS building, the lower school building, and we'll be planning to also build a new school on the adjacent to on another district property nearby. And so our hope is to be able to leverage those buildings to alleviate the overcrowding in that feeder pattern. So there's a lot of overcrowding in the Wilson feeder pattern. So our hope is by adding that square footage, we'll be able to help alleviate the overcrowding in nearby schools. So that's been an engagement process we've been doing over the last few months. And so hope to have a final decision. Nothing will be opening next year. This is for years beyond here. But yeah.
Is there anything else in the budget from your office that you think is interesting or relevant or important, or that you're particularly advocating for, or that you don't want to see the council make changes to? Better question. Is there anything you are worried about or thinking that the council may or may not make changes to that you feel is a priority?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. Probably my budget colleagues could finish out the hour talking about that.
Yeah. Give me the high level version.
Yeah, but I do think that one, I think we have done a lot of thinking. Obviously, the mayor has done significant investment in public schools, and so I think we're all super excited and grateful about that, and have done a lot of thinking about how best to use that. So I feel like we are off to a good start in terms of the budget that's submitted. There's a hand up, Lauren.
Yes, hi, thank you very much for your time. I was just wondering, I think Caitlin kind of touched on this, but is there anything we as realtors can do to support you guys in DCPS and in your attempts to achieve your goals?
Can you restate the first part of that sentence, because it was cutting out a little bit?
Sure, just said I'm Lauren Donnelly. I'm a realtor also, and I have kids in elementary school at Murray Reed, and via the lottery in the Spanish bilingual education there. The question was just basically how Caitlin already kind of touched on it, but how can we as realtors and as a realtor association help you all in the pursuit of your goals? You know, in my mind, number one of which is to continue to improve the quality of the schools.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm probably also going to echo what Caitlin said earlier. I think the biggest piece that I think you all could really help influence is really encouraging families to not just base things on like ratings or very sort of finite data points. That really it is about talking to other parents, you know, ideally visiting the school, reading a little bit more broadly about the school if they can't get out to visit the school. You know, definitely can always reach out to the enrollment team to talk through different options. But that, you know, I think we've done a lot of great things over the last several years and continue to do to sort of rebrand and re-acknowledge the fact that neighborhood schools are strong schools and are schools of choice. I think there is a long history within DCPS that neighborhood schools are sort of default schools if we can't get into where we want. And I think that is changing, and we see that, you know, we see it very differently. And as we are getting more of our families feel confident in the neighborhood schools, and really sort of encouraging families to think about that, to you know, give schools that they may not think, you know, sort of another look, really come in and experience that. And then, you know, I think part of this is, you know, we have done a great job in many of our schools. I think Murray Reed is an example of like a great partnership between parents and schools around how to support the trajectory of a school and how to get school from good to great. And great to awesome and all of that. And that really is a partnership across, you know, central office, our staff, our teachers, our school leaders, and our parents and our communities. And I think encouraging folks to think about DCPS as sort of the system of choice of their first choice, I think is always helpful, and really, you know, not defining everything by, you know, either what has been heard for many years or sort of individual data points, or, you know, single data points, but really thinking about the experience at the school.
What I'm gonna chime in. What's difficult for a lot of our members in this is legally they have very strict rules on what they can and cannot say, right? So I think they want to be able to give their clients good information, or quote unquote good. I'm not even gonna say good or bad, because those are totally subjective words. They want to be able to give their clients you know, fair and accurate information, and encouraging them to do their own research beyond, you know, any sort of particular singular data point, or encouraging them to have open conversations with the schools, just all of the schools, I think that that can really lead to changing that narrative or changing that historical point of view and shifting it to where you're really connecting parents with the schools directly versus just, you know, taking something that you read on the internet and assuming it as truth. And I think that that helps realtors too, because it doesn't put them in the predicament of saying, well, I mean, they legally can say, you know, refer to this one website, this will tell you it's a good school or a bad school. So we're wrestling with that stuff too.
Yeah, that's, yeah. Encouraging folks to do broader research. Social media, like our schools now after COVID are really leveraging social media in very different ways. Our schools after COVID are really leveraging social media in very different ways. So it's very easy now to find a school social media page. A family may not have time to go and visit a school, check their social media page, look at the things that they're doing, highlighting their school programs and their students. That's a really easy way to also try and get a sense of the school culture, and can do it from your phone. And so those are some strategies that you don't have to say what school or not, but just encourage folks to just, you know, take a broader look, dig a little deeper in really getting to know the school options, and that I think would be super helpful. And then many of you, I mean, I think Lauren, you said you're a parent, you know, parents' own voice, again, not as a realtor, but as a parent outside, for those of you that wear both hats, parents' voice to get other parents excited is probably the best recruitment strategy ever, right? Parents first, teachers second. I tell my team, you know, we make a bunch of robocalls and all that kind of stuff, and I'm like, no one wants to hear from central office. What's most motivating for other parents is other parents and teachers. And so as you guys think about also having your parents' hats on, and as DCPS, for those that are DCPS parents, getting the word out about what you like about your school and encouraging folks to enroll and consider is always appreciated as well. Hillary?
Good afternoon. My comment / question was to piggyback off of what Caitlin was talking about. You know, we're in a very tricky space as realtors. I'm a mom of 2 sons that go to Yuying. So, you know, I'm a parent, you want to advocate for education. You know, we love the immersion concept, but as a realtor, you know, we have to be very careful with how we disseminate information. And it's really over the last, you know, years, we've been told like not to, right? But a lot of us are very involved in the community and want to see the school system, you know, continue to flourish. For us here in DC, if the schools don't flourish, you know, the people are going to leave at some point. So we're noticing that people are starting to come back. But we also have a lot of dissemination of inequities across the wards. And so I'm just wondering if this is not a space where we can kind of outwardly think about how in our industry we can support you guys a little bit more from a front-facing perspective without it being our opinions about the schools themselves coming into place and we don't affect our own liabilities. I'll give you an example. Like at our brokerage, Arlo, we recently, like we don't have any links to like great schools or anything like that. All of our links go directly to DCPS website now. If people have questions, we send them straight over to the website as opposed to third-party sites, which other thou shalt be not be named websites kind of do, right? Where they're kind of indirectly opining on what's going on. So we're not doing that. But I'm wondering if there are other ways that we can outwardly support each other so that we're seeing stuff grow.
Yeah, and I do think we have a couple, over the past few years, we've created 3 different marketing materials that we think are very helpful for families. One is a feeder booklet, you know, particularly for new families who are new to the city, understanding what schools they have a right to, how the feeder patterns work, all of that can be overwhelming. And so there's sort of an educational piece of that. So we have a feeder booklet that includes all, so you're not promoting one school, it includes all feeder schools. Here's how to like learn about what your rights are to schools and how to navigate the system. And then based on the comment at the beginning from, I can't remember her name, around the secondary schools, we also have a middle school booklet and a high school booklet. that really talks about our secondary school options, talks about the college and career readiness programs more comprehensively. That again, you're not pushing one school or another, but you're sort of saying, here's what DCPS is doing as we think about secondary schools. Here's all of the middle schools, all of the high schools, and the programming that associated with them, and are really a little bit more targeted educational materials that are brochure-like, that are easier to read, if that's more helpful to link directly to those. Sometimes I think you can link to our school profiles, which is helpful. But if folks are really looking for something to like peruse, it's a little bit more direct on some of those. We can definitely share the links, those direct links that are on our website to those materials. We also do, you know, a printing of those every year. So if folks are interested in having, you know, we usually have extra copies or can think about doing that. Like if people having hard booklets in hand is helpful, that's also something that we can talk about. Those booklets, I think, allow folks to, one, understand, it's both educational in terms of understanding their rights to schools, but then also puts the school in a much broader framing of like, here is all of the different career choices, academies that exist in our high schools, access to dual enrollment with universities that we have in every single high school, and it really sort of gives that broader look that could be helpful. But I like linking directly to the system versus some of these third-party folks that, one, again, many times the ones that I know are really just based on who has submitted their ratings, right? Like, so the folks that are submitting their ratings are, you know, the folks that participate in those things are pretty narrow and not always representative of the city or sort of even the families necessarily that are in the area. And sometimes those sites can be also outdated. And so that's also something hard to keep up with.
We'll take it and we'll follow up with you to make sure that we have the links to all of that. And if there's any way we can, you know, direct people to hard copies of it as well, because we know people like tangible things to hold in their hands. Last question. We're going to do one last question and then I'm going to wrap it up. I've heard Lauren Donnelly, who asked the question earlier, I've heard that DC has reciprocity with some states for in-school university tuition. Is this true?
Yeah, so it is, and don't quote me on this, but it is, I think it's called maybe the TAG program. It's actually the Office of the State Superintendent for Education, OSSE, provides essentially, it's not, it works very similar to that, but I think they either offer in-state tuition at a subset of schools or offer you the credit as the difference between in-state and out-of-state for those schools. I'm not totally sure exactly, but I'm happy to send you the link. But yes, it is a program that not DCPS doesn't offer it, but the state office, the Office of the State Superintendent for Education does offer it for any graduating high schools in a DC school, and that a DC public school, that could be charter or that could be DCPS. I believe it's called the TAG program, but I can follow up with links.
Cool. All right.
Great.
You have given us a lot. You've given us a lot.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, totally. We will, you'll either from myself or Kevin, you can feel free to please use us as your liaisons, and we'll reach out to our members too and do what we can to work together. We'd love to. So with that.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness of the questions and your willingness to also partner with us and think creatively around your constraints and your boundaries, but in a way that is at the end in service for families and students. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. And for our members who are on the line, please continue to look out for the speaker series that we're doing. This is a resource that's tremendous, as you can see from this last one, for yourself, your clients, your families, anyone that you're working with. So please tune in. And